So, recently, Fumito Ueda and his studio Gen Design announced their new project at the Game Awards. Unsurprisingly, it was a very vague announcement with lots of questions left lingering in the air. Still, after watching it, we both came out of it feeling excited and just incredibly happy to finally see a new project by this team after almost a decade of silence. But when we looked around the internet for the reactions of others, well, things started to get a bit strange. And it led to us analyzing a certain pattern of behavior you can see with most Western fans of Fumito Ueda's games. And this is what we wanted to talk about, how no one really gets Fumito Ueda.
What in the Shadow of the Colossus mech are we doing?
From the creators of Shadow Colossus, we're actually getting another game?
Bennett, what if this is a Colossus? What if this is a Colossus from Shadow of the Colossus?
Now, before we really get into the main topic, I'd like to make something clear. This video is not meant to insult or demean any of the people featured in it. Those clips are simply being used to illustrate that there's a certain pattern of thought and behavior among most of the fans of Ueda's works on the internet. And on one side, we get it. We're both huge fans of his and view him as one of the most unique and fascinating game developers in the industry. However, we also feel that the fanbase's passion is oftentimes misguided and just a bit strange. If you're a fan of these games that spent any time on the internet, it's no secret that their fan communities can get a bit intense, especially when it comes to their lore. But it can feel unbalanced, as Shadow of the Colossus is treated both like the fan favorite and the only one that matters. When it comes to Ico, even though it's achieved cult classic status in the more than 20 years since its release, it's never really garnered the same level of theory crafting as its successor, Shadow of the Colossus. One of the many reasons that online discussions about these games can get really frustrating is how both Ico and The Last Guardian are only treated as appendages to Shadow of the Colossus, instead of as their own unique pieces of art. Now, this can be attributed to many reasons. One, obviously, being that sales-wise, Shadow of the Colossus is the most successful game they've ever made. But also the simple fact that, to the average game-buying bro back in the early 2000s, a game where you're riding around on your horse through massive open fields and slaying giant monsters is gonna look a lot more exciting than a game where you hold a girl's hand and occasionally hit some monsters with a stick. This, inevitably, leads to there being a lot more discussion about Shadow of the Colossus than any of Ueda's other games. So it should really come off as no surprise that with more and more discussion come more and more fan theories. And in a game where there is very minimal dialogue and even less written text, it can be hard to do anything more than just extrapolate your own thoughts and opinions on the game's world. And I want to make it clear that there's nothing wrong with that. That's the root of all speculation. However, after 20 years of rampant speculation and fan theories, well, I'm sure you can see from the intro, things have gotten a bit insane, and we've gotten to the point that when this team announces a new project, the first thing people jump to is immediately, well, how does this tie into Shadow of the Colossus? Is it a prequel? A sequel? Are the robots related to the Colossi? Where does it fit in the timeline? And that just feels so incredibly reductive. It's hard not to feel like they're missing the forest for the trees. Like, to a lot of these people, these, at best, extremely tenuous connections they can make between these games matter more than the games themselves.
I've played the Gen Design / Team Eco trilogy, but I only played them fairly recently. Got around to The Last Guardian only mid last year. Watched some lore videos, narrative analysis, etc., etc. Very intriguing worlds. But somehow, to me, playing these games so long after their release, when every mystery has been plundered and processed, and scoured to the ends of the digital confines of the game world, it feels hollow, like the world is truly dead.
All of that feels even more egregious now when this new project is immediately presenting itself as a huge departure from the studio's previous works in basically every way. I mean, for crying out loud, it's a sci-fi game. Your main character has a gun on their back, and we even hear a voice speaking English instead of their usual fictional language. Quite literally everything about this trailer is screaming at us that this game is going to be completely different from everything else they've done in the past. But even with all that, people are still trying to fit this game in a box, trying to assure themselves that this will not be unique, it will not be its own thing. It'll just be yet another appendage to Shadow of the Colossus, just another piece of this mythical jigsaw puzzle they're building in their heads. It can often feel like these people are treating stories, treating art, as if it were a math problem to be solved rather than an experience to be had. Some of this can be attributed to things surrounding the 2018 Bluepoint remake, as with that game, they did what the fanbase seemingly wanted the entire time, adding a secret collectible hunt that, if finished, unlocks a brand new sword, which is commonplace in games, but if you know anything about Shadow of the Colossus fans, a small detail can never be just that. After all, these are the same people that drove themselves into a frenzy trying to find some kind of secret in the game long after it had already been combed over, all based on hearsay and lies. Whether it's the supposed official names of the Colossus actually coming from a random guy lying on the PlayStation forums in 2005, or it's the supposed interview with Fumito Ueda himself in which he states that there's still a secret to be found in-game, just being a total fabrication, the lies that spread throughout the fanbase seemingly take on a life of their own. It feels like the general public were so unaccustomed to a game with minimalistic sensibilities and a story that doesn't over-explain itself, so they seemingly had to take up that job themselves. And after 20 years of this, it's led us to where we are now, with Shadow of the Colossus being treated less like a game and more like some space for fans to play fictionalized ancient aliens in. We can see this exemplified in people obsessively analyzing relics and landmarks, and instead of seeing them as normal products of development, they're treated as ancient relics, and the game itself treated as some archaeological dig site. This isn't uncommon in game fandoms. There are many channels devoted to doing this kind of work for From Software's games, for example. However, there's a crucial difference in the fan response to this kind of work. You're not going to get someone in a Zuli the Witch video talking about how she actually found the super secret boss that Miyazaki was cleverly hiding from us all along, and actually there's an interview where he talks about it. My uncle that works at Nintendo told me about it. Just, trust me. But when it comes to Shadow of the Colossus, you will 100% find these kinds of comments unironically, with people treating Fumito Ueda less like a game developer and more like some kind of oracle speaking the divine truths. In fact, you'll find people applying their own divine truths to the game. They'll imply that the game has been greatly influenced by Western mythology and religious texts in what just seems to be an exercise in confirmation bias. We can see that in reality, Fumito Ueda is anything but an oracle. He looks to his games as works to be interpreted and has fun, purposefully leaving things up to the player's own imagination, a concept that seems utterly lost on a big portion of the Western fanbase because, as we said before, they view stories as puzzles to be solved, and anything that isn't clearly spelled out is just hiding the truth that you, yes you, specifically, can discover. The way they talk about it, it's almost like they believe Ueda has a big book of secrets hidden somewhere in his house, in which all of the lore of his games is written in immaculate detail, and he's just never shown it to anyone for some reason. It's insane. Maybe the saddest part of all the speculation going on about Project Robot is that it isn't the first time something like this is happening. If you've been keeping up with online discussion regarding Ueda's games for long enough, then you'll definitely remember that something very similar to this already happened with their last release, 2016's The Last Guardian, a game that had a very mixed reception at launch, and a large part of which came from people only knowing Ueda from Shadow of the Colossus and expecting an experience similar to that. Now, I'm not trying to mischaracterize anyone. I'm well aware that quite a few people took issue with The Last Guardian's controls, and I'm not saying you're wrong for not liking that game.
Part playful companion and part protector, navigating Team Eco's oftentimes gorgeous world alongside this bird dog is something I will never forget. But between those moments, The Last Guardian is a mess of wonky controls, a poor camera, and some annoyingly finicky puzzles.
But let's be honest with ourselves. A lot of the people that came out of that game feeling disappointed were people expecting it to be another Shadow of the Colossus, instead of a very unique game that stands on its own while having basically no connections to any of Ueda's previous games other than vague aesthetic similarities. Another unfortunate byproduct of this is the fact that The Last Guardian, since its release, has seemingly completely vanished from popular consciousness. But looking back, it's no wonder that's what happened. When people are so completely unwilling to look at or even discuss a game on its own merits instead of just talking about how it relates to a then decade-old game, what else could you really expect? It's really quite sad going to look for meaningful, thoughtful discussions about The Last Guardian online, and the main thing you find are these insane posts about how the Master of the Valley is actually Dorman, or how the boy is actually Eco's next-door neighbor, or if not, they're complaining that a frail little boy doesn't play enough like an action hero, or that a giant wild beast actually feels like a real animal instead of a mindless robot. But I digress. The worst part of all this is that what happened to The Last Guardian is seemingly already happening with Project Robot, where right out of the gate, people are already expecting tons of connections to Shadow of the Colossus, even though we've hardly seen any of the game. And this is definitely one of those situations where we really hope we're wrong, but it feels like the writing's on the wall already. Project Robot is going to come out at some point in the future. People are going to go into it expecting it to be Mecha Shadow of the Colossus and to actually be a prequel about Cyber Dorman trying to take over the world or whatever. And then the game most likely will have absolutely nothing to do with that. All of those people will be extremely disappointed. People will then complain about the controls being bad, the game will receive middling review scores, and within a year will be completely forgotten. It's honestly quite sad to see. Ueda's games are so special, and they only come out once in a blue moon, and it just sucks to see most of the discussion about them not be about how artful they are, how they manage to tell these simple but still beautiful fairy tale-esque stories with little dialogue, how they're unrivaled when it comes to creating atmosphere and worlds that actually feel lived in. No, instead what we get are the equivalent of those theories like, oh no, what if Ash Ketchum was actually in a coma and his adventures were all in his head, and Pikachu was actually the name of his dog? It's just a shame. So, where do we go from here? We're well aware that this is just a small video essay, that we have no control over who will watch it, and even less control over what they'll take away from it, but at the end of the day, I think this is what we really wanted to get across with this video. If looking for all these supposed connections and crafting these theories is legitimately enjoyable to you, then cool, more power to you. We're not here to tell you that the way you choose to engage with art is wrong, and we're here to show you the way. This video is just our 2 cents on the matter, and that, in our opinion, this is a really unhealthy and unproductive way to engage with media. So, if you were interested, we would like to end this video by making a couple of recommendations, if you will. First of all, this might sound extremely obvious, but if you're a fan of Shadow of the Colossus that's never played Eco or The Last Guardian, and statistically speaking there's quite a few of those, you should really play them. They're both phenomenal games by one of the best directors in the medium, and even though they may not come across as epic as their middle sibling to the average player, they're still absolutely emotional journeys that, if you're anything like us, will stick with you forever. We really don't get these games very often, so we should treasure the ones we already have. And they're both really short. You can finish Eco in like 6 hours, and The Last Guardian in just a couple more than that. Other than that, we'd like to recommend a few other YouTube channels that have done some incredible stuff covering these games. Mysticode is someone who's gone through Eco with a fine-tooth comb and honestly knows a staggering amount about that game. Their channel is dedicated to uncovering every single nook and cranny of it, from hidden mechanics to cut content, and even preserving quite a few old TV commercials featuring the game. It's plain from even a glance at their channel that they are incredibly passionate about Eco, and we really felt like that deserved a shout out. Secondly, Nerddoll. This video honestly probably wouldn't have happened without Nerddoll, as her Colossal Misunderstandings video series really helped to crystallize a lot of the ideas we ended up discussing in this video. She has other videos on Ueda games that are also fantastic, and we really recommend her entire channel. She really knows what she's talking about. And finally, if there is one last thing we wanted to say, it's that when Project Robot does eventually come out, you know, sometime this decade hopefully, try going into it with an open mind. Let that game stretch its legs and be itself. Say whatever it has to say. Don't expect it to be about Cyber Dorman and his evil black goo, or about Jack and the Beanstalk. We're both still kind of in disbelief that this game is actually happening. We're getting an Ueda sci-fi game. The possibilities are endless, and who knows, maybe we'll end up making a video on it when it does finally come out. Until then, this is what we had to say on Fumito Ueda, and we both hope you enjoyed it.
正直言うと、その体験演出しかできないっていうんですかね。脚本演出をしようにも、脚本主体で何かを作ろうにも、ビデオゲームには向いてないんですよね。合わないって。じゃあどういう表現が向いてるのかっていうと、体験っていうのはその空間の、リアリティを上げることによってプレイヤーをさもその空間にいるんだと錯覚させて、臨場感を感じさせるっていうのが体験なんじゃないかな。